Hi there. So I'm Erwin Williams, and I want to talk about going far in 2021 with developer stories. Just as I begin, I have to admit that presenting in this format is I'm still learning to do it. This is even different to what I do on a day-to-day basis because for the most part, if I'm presenting to a team, a few of my colleagues will have their cameras on. I can hear them, so it's that is I'm a little more accustomed to that. But just doing a presentation, doing a recording, I found myself changing my tone and starting to go down in my voice and talking in my chest. So I'm hoping that that doesn't happen here, and instead I'm going to pretend this room is filled with some of my colleagues, some of my family, some of everybody. I'm in a full room on a hall talking about stories, which kind of makes sense. Stories requires imagination. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and hopefully you have a good time and we learn something together. So, first of all, I tell stories a lot. Part of my job is to uh, help current engineers fix some of the code I wrote while engineering solutions a few years ago. And back then, I didn't have as much interest in documenting things very properly. I was writing with my team, and everybody knew what they were doing. We had a good time. We were creating things for the first time and paying not enough attention to why we're doing what we're doing. Not enough attention to writing it down properly. Or even if we did, we would have made changes and not updated the thing, and so it became a whole thing. And so these days, sometimes an engineer would be like, hey, why did you do this in such a way? And I would either have a quick response or actually spend some time doing what I should have done years ago and writing it down so the next engineer doesn't have to depend on another engineer to sit and tell them a story. So a lot of my, a fair amount of my time is about that. But beyond that, because I see the value of it now much more than I did when I was younger, I've been trying to convince my team to do the same. So I'm a bit of a captain blogger. I often tell someone, did you write a blog post about that? Could you please do an article for us to explain why you did what you did? And it comes from a genuine place. I like when my team shares stories, but we'll come to that in a little bit. But the point is, I do find stories to be a lot of fun, telling them and hearing them. Now, though, my title could be a bit unfair. It could feel like a bit of like an unfair joke. In 2021, very few of us could have gone anywhere. Starting with the pandemic, we were locked. We were countries' borders were locked down. We in the region, we live in islands. None of them are too that big. I mean, all right, Jamaica, okay, we see you, but not that big. Trinidad and Barbados, the rest of us, our populations are relatively small, speaking in a global context, and you could travel a lot of our countries in a day. So going far might be like too soon, too soon. Nevertheless, I hope by the time I'm done, you can kind of get a sense of what I meant in terms of the kinds of journeys that you could have gone on, that I certainly went on, and how that definitely led to me changing, which is a big part of the journeys anyway. That image you see there is of a news report of some people who I mean, quite rightly so. The population didn't quite wasn't quite pleased with them because they decided to go on a hike, and too many people grouped together in the hike during the pandemic, and it was about trying to go far, but maybe going too far, you know. But we learned, we all learned. But also, it's about developer stories. And I found myself, so to be honest, I came up with the title and even the concept before fleshing out an entire presentation. Um, Kudos to the DevFest team. I kind of been starting to look forward to these presentations, and I knew I wanted to do something, but wasn't quite sure what. So I came up with a title, had some ideas about it, but they weren't fully fleshed out. And so when I say developer stories here, I have found myself realizing that the stories themselves are building blocks. The stories themselves enable more development to happen. So it's yes, you would hear stories about developers, and yes, I'm a developer telling stories, but it's also the stories are units of of growth. They're like Lego blocks, which is which is vibes, and I hope you see that too. So let's keep going. I'm going to talk about three of these kinds of stories. I think they're very different, and hopefully, you see what I mean by going far and how they are building blocks. So first one is press here. I started actually talking about press here since maybe at the top of the year. I spoke to some students at the university about why the book impacted me, and I felt, as it turns out, it it impacted me for the whole year, to be honest. So this is a book, an interactive book for younger children. And when my wife, she goes to the library a lot, and as it turns out, when she found this book, brought it home, we all loved it. It's super simple, and as because it was so, I mean, I'm really glad for places like our National Library in Trinidad. You can just, you don't need to buy everything. Just go there, borrow books, return. Really, 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 really glad for it. But this one, and so we do often do this, but this one we decided to get our own copy. And not, we got our own copy because this became a family thing. This book was so cool. Aunties liked it, and they decided let's get this for the kids. So here's what the book looks like. I'm gonna just play this video just so you can get a sense of how it works. Um, I'm I don't know that I'm that much of a fan of of um what's going on in my presentation. One sec. There you go. Are you okay? Yeah, it's loading. I'm not that much of a fan of go to YouTube and have the book read. I think I need to read the book to my kids. But it's I'm glad this exists so you can see how the book works. Right? So you see off the races you start off super colorful. You're gonna have a good time. So you press here and turn the page. The instructions are right there. And it feels like the book is just reacting to your following its instructions, which is great for toddlers who you want to learn to follow your instructions. And you can see press, the colors change, press, things happen, you rub the colors, things like that, right? So when I saw that, and it wasn't the first time, this was probably after our 10th or 20th reading, it made me think, hey, that's very cool. We could build on that. So this is what I built.
Hello, there. Focus here, then look to your right. Great, you got me. Now press the middle dot again. Perfect. Now, gaze at the sphere on the left until it changes a bit. Good, we're cooking with gas. Look back at the middle sphere. Well done. Now, gaze at the sphere on the right, until it changes too. Fabulous. Press the yellow now. Take a peek at the red. Finally, take a peek at the blue. Perfect. Now, look at the top red one. Nice. Now, see if you find the first yellow sphere.
So, like when from my response to seeing my own creation of this thing changes all the time. Sometimes I think, so what? Other times I think, are real bad. Other times I think, you have plenty more to do. And so maybe you have a range of those feelings. Maybe you went from through all of those. But I didn't intend to build this when we started, when we got the book, when we read the book. Maybe after the first, fifth, fourth time, I was like, this book just remains very cool. I mean, the book is still, it's still popular in my house. We read it a lot. And I think, of course, so shout out to my kids because seeing this presentation and seeing the application because they've used it, they've played with it. It's a web app. I'll share the link afterwards. They've used it, and my daughter's feedback was, "Wait, you need to finish it because that's as far as I got so far." Uh, it kind of excited them. So the idea of them seeing the book sort of come to life in an augmented reality context has driven them back to the book. My kids are pretty young. One is should be 5 soon, and the other is 2. I have a couple others anyway. And the the way they kind of have gone back to the book, seeing it in this presentation is it does give me a sense of joy, and it's that kind of a thing of stories building on stories. That story led to this augmented reality experience, which sent them back to the book. Very, very cool. Nevertheless, I built it using, I started it off in Glitch. I think Glitch and A-Frame have been a really good combination for me. So I went up to glitch.com, found the A-Frame starting template, and just started to modify that. Had to learn a bit more about how 3JS works to kind of get it to where it's at, and plenty more to go. But I think it's been a nice way to connect those two things, the things you read with the things you experience, and back to the things you read. So that was press here. I want to talk about Fusion. And remember, we were on lockdown. And like I said, some people got both because they couldn't appreciate the importance of separating and having social distance. But we, of course, we were so locked down that, as I said, our visas expired, our passports expired. We couldn't go anywhere. We couldn't even use it, you know? So going for, I think, as it turns out, Fusion was a real good way of dealing with this need to get out and go into a strange place. So I want to start at the end. I participated in the Fusion Adventure Series and took about 10 hours to run through six, I don't want to call it hikes, but yeah, 6 hikes. And I did okay. I did okay. And sometimes when you do these things and you have a good time, you really want to capture the experience in different ways. So it was actually called Fusion Virtual 7. And this is the source story, of course, which was that for each of these jaunts through the forest, it it came with its own story. And especially for me, I didn't know those trails. I wasn't that much into hiking. I would have gone on a couple, but I'm more of a road runner. And so meeting those trails pretty much guaranteed I would fall along a few times. In one memorable time, I was in front of a friend of mine did one of the trails, and the fall was so spectacular. My glasses went so, and my jersey turned up this way, and it was a spectacular fall. I still got up and finished, but you had to expect that was happening. Along the way, though, I ensured I left voice notes for my family so they knew where I was, they knew what was happening. So, in terms of the Fusion story, it actually is a collection of stories. And such a good time was had that, well, that's not true. I can't say such a good time. So a time was had. And let me show you what I mean with this video that sort of captures my feelings for one of these stories. You'll see some text in it. The text you see kind of represents how I felt at that moment, just to drive home that it mightn't have been a good time, but still, I think a good story emerged from it. Take a look. Oh, there you go, it's loading. So when I saw this scene in Endgame, Avengers Endgame, of Tony leaving the voice note, it reminded me about the Archean trail for Fusion. And of course, if you are watching this and you participated in Fusion, then you would probably remember that particular feeling. Nevertheless, all the runs weren't that hard. They didn't all produce that collection of words at the end. And at the end of it, they sent us this nice photo that represented, in my mind, a medal. So normally when you do these kinds of longer races, you get this participation medal, and if you're not a runner, you tend to laugh at it, thinking you just get a medal for running. But if you do run, those medals are you have a collection of them. They show that you were there, you did it, did the half marathon, or you did some 10K or 5K. And in this case, our medal, quote unquote, was the certificate of completion that I was very glad to receive. But I did wonder, is there another way to represent this? And it just came from the fact that this was a set of virtual races. Yes, we physically ran, but we ran at different times. And you needed to use your watch or your phone to track it on Strava or Endomondo. Let's port one for Endomondo, of course. Track it in some way. And so what I found myself thinking was maybe we could do this, maybe we could present this in a different way, virtually speaking. Fusion at least as well, because it was a virtual series and you couldn't finish the run and normally look up at a leaderboard somewhere. You had to kind of wait until the end of the period for that particular course, and then they would send out via email the updates, which I was really glad to see they did it in this way. This is a Power BI dashboard that you could see all the results for. Very cool. And Strava held our personal data. So because Fusion held the results, Strava held the data. Those two things represented data sources for me, so I combined them and I produced this, which is a bit of a is my take on what a virtual trophy could look like. You know, it does capture the courses, and it builds on what those sort of stories are. Like I think I was telling some friends, to me, doing it in this way, well, take a look at it, right? So this is all the courses that I did, as well as the Fusion team's notes, because they would have sent out summaries of how I participated in it. Again, I have the URLs for this stuff that I'll provide afterwards, so you can kind of see it for yourself. So this also used A-frame, but I took a long time to figure out some of that stuff that feels very simple. But this is one of the even more meta than the one before, because this takes 6 stories and 6 maps and folds them on themselves to tell a different story, to build a different experience. And I'm hoping that maybe for all the other virtual events that we'll surely have, because I think this was pretty successful, that maybe it will actually do cause even the organizers to do something differently around how to represent the experience in a virtual context. So far, I've gotten good feedback on it from even them, so that's cool. So this is the Fusion stories, the collection of stories built upon to do something new. And so let me kind of end by talking about actual developers who tell developer stories. And I think developer stories is a missing link for us. Stories by developers about their experience. Stories about developers making world-class things. Teluis has had um, the philosophy, it's in our tagline, that we could write software here that has global impact. I don't think we need to convince people about that today. I think that's not true. People still need to hear it. But there are many more engineers and developers either working in the Caribbean or from the Caribbean who work in other places who know that we could build amazing things from right here. But one of the things we're missing, I think, is the storytelling. We can build quirky things, even quirky jerseys like this one I'm wearing. But we need to bring those stories to the fireside. We need to share those things more, the virtual fireside. And I'm definitely glad that over the years, we've been doing that. So though we've been in the pandemic and everything has been remote, uh, one of the things we were able to benefit from was something we started many years ago, and that's Telios Power Hour. So for us, Telios Power Hour has rescued us, uh, a, has been a source of salvation for us in terms of hearing from each other and telling cool stories. Um, but one of the things we we still are, I think, are trying to capture is that randomness that you would have in an office context. So Power Hour has been evolving, and one of the things we did this year was change the format internally. So even though you can go to YouTube and see some of our Power Hour episodes, even some from this year, they're very, very few compared to what we do. We have Power Hour every week. It's a hour long meeting, and the format we changed to was that in a given presentation, you can have 5 or 6 segments of teams just sharing what they did. And that has a nice, strong element of randomness to it. In that you might just ask a developer, hey, what did you guys do this week? And they'll be like, we did nothing spectacular. It was a pretty normal week. And yet when you talk, you find that, oh, this thing happened and that thing happened. So it's much more free fun, much more free form. And therefore, I think we've had fun. I think if you ask the guys at Telios, that format of telling stories definitely has been an improvement or a nice addition. We do still have our long episodes, but those are like once a month as opposed to every week. And instead, we have an hour of updates around the team. And because they're different teams at Telios, it's good to kind of hear what other guys are working on. So very, very cool. Um, but that's not the only place I've been getting stories from. And honestly, I cannot tell you what I think is the best developer story I've heard for the year. I can't because it involves internal components and it involves applications that I should not talk about on a public forum lest my boss, who may be watching, hey, how you going, Kevin? He, he's not pleased. Nevertheless, this particular story involved 2 developers. Again, remember I mentioned that some of the code I wrote I no longer maintain. Um, but these developers are maintaining it. And they have to figure things out as much as I might share with them. Here's how the thing works. And so they would have been figuring out how it works. And what I'm saying to them, even though I didn't do it, I'm saying to them, I need you to tell us how this thing, what you figured out. And so these guys, in their bootstrapping and swashbuckling through the code, came out not just with a solution to a problem they were trying to fix, but with such an epic story that it super inspired me. It felt as if the thing they made, so they fixed a problem. One. So the first story is I fixed a problem. But the second story is here's how I fixed the problem. And in choosing to tell us how, it felt as if they combined Dungeons and Dragons and applications at Telios and smooshed them together to come up with this epic tale. And it it was amazing. I was so glad for it that it caused me to hopefully, and I'm hoping this happens in 2022, so maybe I'll come back next year with an update, make a game based on their story. Because the story was a really good way of communicating how the system works. So when we hire more engineers, instead of saying, here, go read this readme that is pretty bland and there's a time and place for that, we can say, after you read the readme, let's see how much you understand with this game. I want to make a game with physical cards and doing cool things. And you slap this card down and you can't move and the system can't work. I want to do that. And that desire, that delight, it comes from the story. And so, to sort of wrap things up, oh, what's going on here? There we go. Yeah, to wrap things up, um, I'm super happy for what these guys did, and uh, it gave me a whole new way of expressing uh, how a system works, and that was all because of a story. So that's it for me in terms of developer stories. And if there was a meta narrative here, it would be that even though I didn't physically go places because of these stories, in my imagination I went on such an amazing journey that that I'm so grateful for it. And I'm looking forward to how the rest of us shares amazing stories that cause us to go on journeys we couldn't have planned to go on before. So, I'm Irwin. You can get me on Twitter at iStar as my domain or my email address. So I'm looking forward to hear from you, hear your cool stories, see them in your blogs, in your articles, in your vlogs, wherever you tell them. And I hope you have a really good DevFest 2021. Cheers.